Welcome to Lead with Storytelling. In this episode, we're thrilled to have Priya Bates, an award-winning professional communicator and president of Inner Strength Communication, join us. Priya brings a wealth of experience as the co-host of the Leader Like Me podcast and works with diverse clients across technology, retail, financial, government, and education sectors. Priya's extensive credentials include being an accredited business communicator, IABC, and one of the first certified strategic communication management professionals globally. She is also recognized as an International Association of Business Communicators IABC Fellow, a prestigious global lifetime achievement award in the field. Based in Toronto, Canada, Priya's insights into storytelling and communication strategies are invaluable. Join us as we delve into her journey and glean valuable lessons on leading with storytelling in today's dynamic landscape. Stay tuned for an enriching conversation with Priya Bates on Lead with Storytelling. Welcome, Priya.
Oh, it's really nice to be here, Sochi.
It's really an honor to have you. And just like I said in the beginning, first introduction to you was into your work was a session that you facilitated with the ARISA, the communication hub, and after hearing, I believe it was on internal communications, and you were sharing experience and insights into best practices, and having heard all the tips that you shared, I couldn't but draw let's say a common thread of how storytelling really applies to many of these trends and insights. But well, before we get neck deep into storytelling per se, I always like to ask my guests, how do you like to be introduced? I mean, I know I did this thing that scripts and all that, but how would you like to?
I think when I think of who is Priya Bates, there's so many facets of who you are, right? And I guess that's part of the storytelling, that everyone has a story to tell. And
True.
for me, I have been passionate about internal communication for 30 years now. I've been working in the field, and
Wow.
I know that, I know I don't look it.
I was
At
just
least
going to
I'd
say.
like to pretend.
I was just going to say, yeah, that's it.
but I, and the reason I love internal communication is because it's about the people who work for our organizations, right? It's our leaders, it's our front lines, it's the people who are delivering on the promises of an organization, through their actions and behaviors and decisions every day. And so, one of my mantras for inner strength is all about building strength from the inside out. And that applies both professionally and personally. And so really, I realize that there's such magic that occurs when we can actually have alignment and engagement from our people in our organizations where we spend most of our time. And that translates into those customer experiences. And so it really is so connected. But on top of, in addition to my professional life, I'm a mother of 2 daughters. I am a dog owner. Didn't realize I'd be a dog owner, but now I have a dog who now is in charge around here. I am a wife. I am a cook. I am a foodie. I love food, and I love to travel. So there's a lot of different parts of your life that are so full, and I just enjoy everything the world has to offer. And I just came back from Paris a few days ago, so I'm really full of joy right now after that, incredible journey just a few days ago.
Talk about setting the stage for a very engaging conversation. Oh my God. I don't know if we should talk about your trip now, or should we just stick with us, because I feel like you really up the ante for this, and I don't know. I'm feeling really intimidated.
Oh, don't feel intimidated. So
Okay.
so do you want me to tell you a story about why I was in Paris, Sochi?
You got me a story, so please,
So
please.
so when my older daughter, who is now 21, was 7 years old, she loved this book called Eloise. She loved Eloise stories, and so Eloise in Paris was one of her favorite books. And she'd keep asking, "When can I go to Paris? When can I go to Paris?" So little 7-year-old. And so I said to her, being the strategic planner and mother that I am, I said, "When you graduate from high school and you get into a good university, I will take you to Paris." And that she graduated from high school in 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020. She missed her prom. She missed her graduation ceremony. We were all stuck inside.
Oh man.
She spent her first year at university in her bedroom, and we weren't able to figure out this trip. And so she is now graduated from university. So 4 years later, and what I said to her is, "You know what? We found a window. It was 5 days that I could fit into my schedule, and we took my younger daughter along as well, and we finally made it to Paris and had an incredible trip." And in retrospect, both girls said, "You know what? This was the right time for us to go. I think we wouldn't have appreciated it 4 years ago like we do now." And it was just magical. Like, we were just able to spend the time together, mothers and daughters, and do it in a magical city like Paris. And it wasn't a long time, but it was we made the most of it. And sometimes that's part of the story too, is taking the time to connect with each other when we can.
That is so inspirational. And when you talk about parenting goals, um, so my kids and I we started reading, um, and my wife still has problems with this. We're reading Children of the Lamp. I think it has a TV series now. I'm not sure, but the kids prefer to read the story than watch the TV series. So we're reading Children of the Lamp, and it's about these kids that didn't know that they were jinn, and they are set up on this adventure with their uncle Nimrod, and it's set in England, in New York, and in Cairo, the dusty deserts of Cairo. But my kids have been following that. We've been reading it every night for the past, give and take, 1 month or so. It's really it's a thick book. And then this morning, my daughter wakes up with a bag packed up. Right while my wife and I are having breakfast, and she says she wants to travel. And I'm worried. I'm worried that my wife might say, "You know what? This is your fault." But you know what? You just inspired me, and now I am committed that we will
I love
finish
it.
it. We will finish this book. However, we inspire our kids to be better versions of ourselves, we will do it. And after hearing this Priya story, yeah, we're probably going to be setting higher goals right after today.
That's great. I love it.
Thanks for sharing that, Priya. That's great. But what it is really tells me is that you are to heart a true a storyteller, a born storyteller, and it's usually very important for me to start off like this, because having a good sense of what drives you, it's also very informing or informative. I like to say that, but I think the correct word I want to say is inspiring, because at the end of the day, you want to be motivated to do something, or to
Yes.
replicate something, and having said that, how do you think storytelling as a driving force or as a tool can be used to leverage, let's say, cultural understanding?
It's a great question. I think that, so many of the conversations right now around, diversity, equity, inclusion, are very negative. They're very divisive. and sometimes intentionally so. And I think the power of storytelling is it helps us connect with one another. So if we're trying to, build understanding, if we want to build inspiration, if we want to build engagement, and we want to build that the feeling and the understanding that there's more that connects us, there's more that we have in common, where we can understand one another and relate to one another than things that we don't have in common. It's such an opportunity for us to be able to move forward as one and together. And that's, I think, what's been missing in a lot of the conversations that have been happening. I know I wrote a book with a partner in the UK, a woman named Advita Patel, called Building a Culture of Inclusivity. And it's effective internal communication for diversity, equity, inclusion. And as we went through that book writing journey, it was really interesting how connected, first of all, what we did was, so where I'm an internal communications professional, I understand change management. I've helped a lot of organizations go through transformational change. I'm very focused on employee engagement. And all of those things play a role in DEI and delivering these inclusive cultures correctly, because I think we've been doing it wrong, quite honestly. We've been checking a lot of boxes. Organizations are approaching DEI as something that is an add-on, is separate from the business, separate from what we're trying to accomplish here. It's they've appointed one leader who doesn't actually have a lot of the right investment. They're on their own, and it's not embedded into the organization. So what we end up with are the stuff. I'll call this stuff. We end up with we were talking to, on our podcast, we do a podcast with a leader like me, and we talked to a great gentleman named Dr. Jonathan Lamptey, Ashong Lamptey. And Dr. Jonathan said that, a lot of companies start with flags, food, and fun. I love that term, right? So let's now decide on what flags to fly. Let's do all kinds of occasions where we bring food, and then let's try to celebrate. And then what we end up with is a lot of noise, which is not actually moving the organization forward. What we do is do training, so we can check a box and say we've been trained on anti-bias. And those things are important. But what's more important for me is not the training, but how do you actually take the learnings from that training and bring them to life through actions, decisions, and behaviors. And that part is often missing. They check a box under that training. And then we create these ERGs, these employee resource groups. And what's happening with a lot of those employee resource groups is what we're hearing from people who are on them is that there are some organizations that are doing it well, but in most cases, you're asking marginalized or underestimated, some people say, individuals who to spend their free time, and maybe it's not their free time, it's their own time, helping solve the company's problems and advocating for themselves. And then what you do subconsciously, I guess, is take them away from the career building opportunities that their colleagues who don't have to be part of an ERG are getting. So then when you talk about equity, when you talk about let's now do the interview for why you should get that next level role, you've been distracted on these ERGs while somebody else got the opportunities and the projects that would actually be career building, right? And so you're sitting there thinking, this stuff it's creating noise, it's creating an incredible drain on effort, but is it contributing to the organization and its goals? Until it does, we can't move things forward. So it's that whole we have this opportunity to really connect people and unify them and align them. But we all need to be on the same page, moving in the same direction in order to get there. That was a long answer to your question.
No, not at all. I think it was well explained. I mean, long or not. I don't know how. Don't think that at all. Left to me, we could have a conversation for the whole day. But
Yes.
I'm being respectful of your time and the time of anybody else who might be listening. That's all. Other than that, perfect.
That's great.
But and this ties to what how we started off, which was trying to not so much as capitalize, but emphasize nuance, in conversations, in storytelling, and kind of leads me to my next question, which is right now from this last answer you gave, with how do you balance cultural nuance with cultural nuance when you tell a story? How do you balance cultural nuances with the need to be globally relevant?
I think it's possible. I think there's so much that we talk about in terms of establishing your foundations. So because I spent most of my career in corporations, big corporations, because I've worked from a client perspective with a variety of verticals, like worked with government, I've worked with retail, I've worked with manufacturing, I've worked with mining organizations, it's such a variety, and you think of all these different organizations. And whenever I walk into a new organization and we do our communication audits and our DEI audits, we really look for what is it that they have in common. And those foundations are your strategy, your mission, your vision, and your values. And when we start looking at those values in an organization, we want to make sure that we're explaining what those values mean to people, right? Not just from a words perspective, but from a behavior and decisions perspective. Because those foundations I talk about actually help us make decisions on how we act and deliver. And one of the examples I often use when I talk about the values is think about a value like respect. Most organizations, you'll go look online and they'll have a value that says respect. Well, respect means different things in different contexts. Respect could mean I want you to treat me the way I want to treat you, like we want to be on the same level, right? That's respectful. But respect also, in some cultures, talks about a hierarchy. It means you need to respect your elders, or you need to respect the hierarchy, and those are two very different things from the same word. So when an organization says we want to be inclusive, we want to be, customer focused, when we want to be respectful, what does that mean? And how does that translate into behavior and actions and decisions? And that's the conversation that we need to be having with our employees so that we define it. And then once we know what that means, how that plays out in different cultural contexts is possible. It doesn't mean that we're behaving like robots. So I always say we don't want to be robots in an organization. We want to, because how we approach customers in probably in Nigeria, from where you're from, versus maybe even India, where I was born, may have nuances, but are they founded in in respect and what that means to the organization? So corporations and organizations, whether they're local, national, or global, have cultures. And it's you defining what that culture means and how you show up every day for your customers, your communities, and your colleagues that actually will help you then, it doesn't mean that you're approaching everything exactly the same.
That's powerful. And I just want to ask, how or where does empathy come in here? I mean, especially where it concerns fostering inclusivity in the workplace.
Empathy is critical, right? I was at an event recently, and a woman who spoke at the event. She's a recruiter, and she was saying how when she was growing up, or when she was being educated, she studied anthropology, and it seems like I'm totally where am I coming from when I'm talking about anthropology? But one of the things that she said that really struck me is what she learned. She was talking about gender differences, right? She was talking about, because I was at a women's event, it was around Women's Day, and she said that one of the things women are learn to do and learn to be is empathetic, right? So how we're raised is about caring about others, and we're understanding what everybody's needs are. It's kind of like inherent into how most of us have been raised, whereas men are usually raised to focus on ego. It's about winning. It's about what you need. It's very different. But here's what she said that really struck me. She said, when we're dealing with, when a woman in a workplace is dealing with a man, right? First of all, this is generic, right? So there are people, everybody has ego and everybody has empathy. But she says, because we've been raised with empathy, she says, if you actually approach the person who has ego with ego, there's a clash, right? If you actually, a person with empathy and another person with empathy are going to create something wonderful together. But if you want to actually change minds, you have to approach it with empathy. So the only thing that can break down ego is empathy, and helping somebody understand your perspective and understand the bigger picture. Empathy is about understanding somebody else's perspective. It's understanding how we can do things together, versus ego is all about me, right? Empathy is about the collective. And I just think there is so much power in that we need to create more empathy and understanding. And to do that, we need to understand ourselves first before we try to change the world.
And while that speaks to an approach to to drawing people into whether or not drawing you into onto the team, while the team works towards a particular goal as an organization, or team goals. I want to kind of like shed some light. I wonder if you could shed some light on the qualities of an officer. I wanted to say a storytelling officer, but at least an officer, and this could be the head of HR at any point in time, could be the head of internal comms at any point in time, and it could also be the CEO. What are in your mind, what are the key, maybe 3 or 5, I don't know, however number you find as relevant, what are the key characteristics of a good storyteller?
There is one of the women that I learned storytelling from, like the formal storytelling. Everybody's a storyteller, right? We can do it intuitively, but there's a woman named Gabrielle Dolan who wrote a book called Stories for Work, and she's in Australia. And so she talks about the components of a story that have always resonated with me. And that's the fact that a story always starts with some sort of tension or problem, right? People are drawn in because they hear about a problem that we can all relate to, right? Or a problem that they can see, and that starts to build that empathy and curiosity. Um, Usually from that problem, there's a tragedy that happens. Something goes wrong. Next, there's a transition. It's that light bulb, right? From what went wrong, this is what I learned. And then the last piece is triumph. That the story usually ends on a lesson or something that is inspiring. And when you can take your audience on that journey, it's something that people tend to remember. So whenever I'm in organizations teaching you about storytelling, or if I'm working with an executive, I ask those questions. What problems are you trying to solve? What did you learn? What went wrong? What did you learn from it? And how did you win at the end? And if you can bring those pieces to a story, that's when people will really relate to it, because people like to see people kind of meet the challenge. Like when we think about the stories that resonate with us personally, it's you, and especially in the cultural context, it's usually that that person who triumphed amidst the barriers, that they learned from it. They really did an amazing job of things that, and they weren't things that were inaccessible, if that makes any sense. When we talk about the stories that inspire us, it's you think about it's possible for everyone to triumph, right? And I think that's the thing. Like, I love new immigrant stories. Every one of our parents, and I'm sure you came from Nigeria, Soji, not too long ago. My parents came from India in the 70s. So hearing their story about, like, my father always talks about how he came to Canada with $7 in his pocket. My in-laws, who came after the war from England, who had to get on a boat and come across the channel and land in New York to get to Canada, and starting with nothing, and all of their furniture got lost. Like, anything they brought back, I think there's only one piece that came from England with them that made it to Canada, right? We hear these stories and we're like, wow, how did you do it? What happened? Like, it just creates that curiosity. You want to know more about that person because of the things that have gone wrong, unfortunately, right? Often we're not looking at, we don't have as much empathy, I have to admit, for somebody who had it all handed to them, right? And sometimes that's can be a challenge. But where we get really inspired is when somebody, against all odds, triumphed.
More like a hero story, right?
We love that, but everybody's a hero, right?
Exactly.
Like that's the thing that's exciting about storytelling. Everyone has a story to tell.
Oh my. I get welled up when I hear new immigrant stories. And I just finished reading a very beautiful book, History of Burning by Janika Oza. I think it's History of a Burning. Yeah, it's very, 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 very interesting. And she's also based in Toronto, I believe. I think there was a story about. I only heard it when I came here. Of course, being based. I mean, being based here in Canada, you can't help but hear references to certain key historical facts. Like there was a crisis in Toronto. There was a riot in the 80s, I think, racial riot in the 80s, I think. But she told a great story about how not hers, but the fictional characters' fathers, grandfathers, great grandfathers moved from India, were tricked into traveling all the way to Zimbabwe to work on railways. And then from there, when a certain war broke out, they were moved on refugee status, scattered. In fact, broken up. The family was broken up into a faction going to, or a part of the family going to UK and another to Canada. And I couldn't help but I couldn't help but relate to the feeling of being uprooted, whether by
Yes.
your own choice or by forcefully by a circumstance. And I can't help but say as well that certain stories do stories generally do have a tendency to be hijacked. And I want to say, for instance, drawing on something you said earlier about ticking the boxes. Organizations that feel that they need to tick boxes are just naturally prone to hijacking stories to enable them to meet those objectives. And I remember recently there was a campaign, not so recently, or depending on how you see it. Google did this campaign for their courses, and the premise of the story, the story on which the campaign was premised is that I'm a new immigrant, and just because I was doing this thing before doesn't mean I can't learn new things, and hence I have Google certificates to help me to better my odds of finding a better job, getting settled with my new place. And I loved it. I do love Google. This is not this is not anything negative. It's not a negative review for the Google certificates, but there is always a risk when we talk about brand storytelling, corporate storytelling, for the drive or the impetus to actually tick boxes to make us hijack stories and fall prey. And this is where I'm going with this. Fall prey to tokenization and stereotyping. What do you advise? Or first, maybe what is your take on that? And then what do you advise as steps to avoid those potholes, tokenization, stereotyping, when using storytelling as a tool?
I think that it's, first of all, do your research. Absolutely. What the challenges often are on those stories that go wrong in some ways, where your audience is actually cringing instead of being inspired by it, is that it's someone, we have a lack of diversity that is representative of our audiences. I say our colleagues, our customers, and our communities. So when we look at the executive teams in organizations, the decision makers, and then we look at our communications and marketing teams, they are not representative of those other areas. And so they're sometimes guessing based on trying to check the boxes on what the story should be. And that is often mired in your biases. If you don't have paid people, so I'm saying don't ask your ERGs to approve your ads for you if you're in marketing, but you actually have to understand those audiences you're trying to impact. So are you doing your research and having your conversations with those individuals so that you're actually telling authentic and real, talking about authentic, real experiences from their perspective? And that's really important. It's understanding what your representation is in those areas, right? So what looks realistic? Sometimes when we try so hard to count ourselves in to the narrative as we're not racist, which is what's kind of happening. And we see it in our advertising. We see it everywhere where we're almost going too far because we're not now representing the diaspora, of Canada or the places you live. I'd imagine in Atlantic Canada, that representation is very different than it would be in Toronto, than it would be in Nigeria, right? So who are your audiences? Who are your employees? Who are your communities and your customers? And then make sure that you're matching from a representation perspective, because if you're not, then it feels off. And you don't understand why it feels off, but it does, because it isn't real, right? And that's the piece. It's like, how do you make it real? It's by doing your research. Some of it's based on numbers, some of it's quantitative, and some of it's qualitative. So once you understand who you're representing, then let's talk to them. Because if your team is not representative, you're going to get it wrong. So bring in the consultants or talk to your audiences and get their perspectives, so that where you're coming from when you're telling those stories is from an authentic place. It is coming from a real source. It is coming from your understanding of who your audience is and what resonates with them. Because there are plenty of organizations that get it right too. My kids laugh at me because I cry during commercials, right? It's just like when an organization gets a commercial right, I am in tears. I'm like, oh my God, that was so good. That was so great. It really resonated with me. So you can get it right, but those organizations that get it right are getting it right because they understand who their people are.
Apart from the laughing and the crying, how, and this is not to make it, this is not to make it simple, but what kind of feelings do you come away with after hearing an authentic, inclusive story? What does it, explain, what's that feeling like?
It's
And
feeling, it's a word.
Feel free to plug any organization, the client, or that you think it makes a good example.
So I think that whenever I do my storytelling presentation, I do some workshops on storytelling. I use this ad, and I probably recommend that you go look at it. I know it's under attack right now because of grocery store prices, but I worked for Loblaw, right? So I led internal communications at Loblaw Companies Limited for 6 years. I have, loved working for that organization, learned a lot, and it's the largest private sector employer in the country with over 200,000 employees who work for it. There's an ad that they did during, I don't know what event was coming up, but it was something about eating together. And obviously they were trying to talk about President's Choice products, but it was the power of how food brought people together. And the ad starts with everybody on their devices, looking, not talking to each other in a building. So they're all apartment dwellers, and she's going through the elevator and she's going through the subway, and all the people are not talking to each other and they're all looking at their devices. And she comes into her apartment and her roommate is sitting there and is looking at their device and not talking to her either. And she has this moment where she goes, enough, right? I want to connect with people. So she talks her roommate into taking their dinner and their table and their chairs and put them in the hallway of their apartment building. And they all sit. And as people are coming home, each apartment dweller decides to bring their tables out, and they create a long table where they're all sharing their food. And it was there was something, first of all, you saw the multiculturalism, you saw the age variety, you saw people connecting over something that they had in common, that it was something about that ad that I just loved. And it was very representative of what I was experiencing, right? So nowhere did you see the products. What you saw was people coming together. and they were coming together over food. But it was a feeling that you had. It was, we're all connected. We all want the same things. We all have things that are more common than different. And at the end of the day, we're human. Right? And that matters. And that we're different too. So what I loved about it is, everyone had something to contribute. I love that. Like so I'm talking about maybe it was a 30 to 60-second ad, and I drew from it so many things that felt like you were included, you mattered, you belonged, you're understood. We want you to be part of this experience. And that's when an organization gets it right, that's how you feel. You don't feel like they're just checking a box to make sure everybody's included. It's telling a story of, and that was what was great about that ad. What I'll do, Sochi, is I'll send you a link to the ad on YouTube.
Yes, please.
So you could link to it, put it in your comments as well. So anybody who wants to see it, every time I show that ad, and people in the audience need Kleenex. It's really that powerful. So I think that's when, the one thing that Loblaw does well is brand storytelling, and really talking about who are we trying to connect with and what are we trying to accomplish here. Is it to drive traffic to their stores? Absolutely. That's probably every organization, every business is trying to develop business. Like, that's why they're still around. But they know how to use that to connect with people, to actually make it happen, have people feel like they're included.
Awesome. Sure, definitely. And so you wrote a book with Avital Patel, building a culture of inclusivity, effective internal communications for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I will link to that book so anyone else can watch it. I will also leave a link to your podcast,
Yes.
Leader Like Me, so people can also get a context of what you're passionate about and the people who you've spoken with in that regard. Speaking about your podcast, how have you so you have, let me make it direct. How do you amplify diverse voices and stories on your platform?
We learn about different people who are doing great things. So we've had some incredible conversations. The minute we stepped into this DEI space, it was interesting the people who started showing up. And because we understood, like Avita Patel and I, yes, we have a variety. There's diversity amongst us, both in terms of age, and also where we live. Her in Manchester, UK, and me in Toronto, Canada. So there's different North American versus European perspectives. But we realized that we needed to learn from others. And so our first season of the podcast, we brought in some incredible speakers to talk about, men's violence against women. We had speakers who talked about what it meant from a pride perspective and how to connect with the LGBTQ plus community. We had, people who understood Indigenous perspectives. And so we really were curious, and we wanted to learn. And as we found people with various perspectives, we wanted to amplify those voices to our audiences. So we find people on LinkedIn. This season, so we just launched our season last week. We launched our new season, which is based on building a culture of inclusivity. And what we wanted to do is counter the narrative that DEI is dead. So we're hearing this narrative going on, and we're like, wait a minute, first of all, there's a lot of progress that's been made. Where we were 4 years ago, before the murder of George Floyd, is very different from where we are now. And we wanted to say we need to acknowledge there's progress that's been made, but we wanted to highlight organizations that are doing things right. Are they perfect? No. No one's perfect. We're all learning. The space is changing. But we started looking for organizations and reaching out to them. Our first interview is with Courtney Williams, who is the head of communication with the Obama Foundation. That was a fascinating interview and not something that I expected. So she talked about how they navigated some of the challenges in the community where the Obama library, so every president in the US ends up creating a foundation and a library in a different place, and they chose the south side of Chicago to build the library and center. And it was just fascinating, her story around engaging with the community and what the foundations they built on to make sure that it was successful. And I believe that library is going to be opened in 2025. But it's a fascinating interview to listen to. We've interviewed the head of people and culture at Kellanova, which is Kellogg's. Fascinating. We talked to the head of DEI at PepsiCo globally. So we're just we're hearing these stories from these incredible leaders and what drives them and where they're still investing and why and how they're embedding the practices into every day into the organization. One, because they're global organizations. It's very different if you're a local organization. But if you're a global organization, you need to, and your audience is global, you need to be focused on making sure your organization is showing up the way it needs to in the various cultures around the world. And so it was really like, stay tuned to that entire season. Just incredible organizations where you're going to hear some great, stories and actions and behaviors and decisions that those organizations are participating in order to really drive inclusive cultures, so that they can actually deliver to cultures around the world.
That's great. Yeah, it definitely sounds like a bomb of a season to listen to and watch out for. But I think I get a sense that we've so far been talking about it's been a little bit one-sided. And just to tip the balance just a little bit, or to nudge it. What would you say is the value of I mean, what does this very inclusive storytelling that we do from our client side, what does it do for the marginalized? What do the marginalized communities, the underrepresented voices, what do they get out of it?
Depends on what you're talking about. So when Sochi, when you're talking about, I'd be curious about your take on what do you think they're not getting out of it? Like there seems to be something in that question you're asking that I want to understand.
Okay, so on one side of the player, right, or the storyteller, it's driving towards or motivations to impact, right? And from our own side, when we report, it's we talk about the quantity, we talk about qualitative meaning, we did do this, or this happened, or we got this testimonial from a recipient of the maybe the action or the campaign, or but how does that story look like as it's being told from the other side? I mean, the marginalized communities. So for instance, if they are First Nation people, or a racialized minority, what does true impact look like to them, or from your experience, as you might have seen?
True impact is actually the fact that there's the feeling that they are part of the story and they benefit from the story. If that helps, because I think that if it feels like they're telling this story to better themselves, better the organization, drive customers, it's all about bottom line, that's going to, but it doesn't at the end of the day help or lift up those communities, then there is a disconnect. And that's what we always talk about is we talk about the say-do. I don't know if you've heard of this, Sochi, so does what you say, which is your story, actually match up with what you do?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So you can have, one of my examples is, we're seeing a lot of stock imagery that's being used by organizations around the world to show the diversity, right? So you come to the website, you see stock images all over. It's not their real employees often, or they've grabbed the employees, but they've grabbed a subset so they can check a lot of boxes. You're laughing. The thing is funny. So you've got all of this stuff, and they're telling a story of who we are as an organization on our website, on our advertising, on our recruitment material, right? But when my daughter walks into your organization, your store, your restaurant, your business, and walks in those doors, what does she see? When she looks at the executives and the board of directors on your website, how many of them are not even putting their pictures up anymore? That's a sign. That's a flag for me, right? Or the speaker lineup. So I've seen this a few times, even especially in communications, where global companies managing conferences have this beautiful image as their main image, of a diverse audience. And then you look at the speakers and there's no diversity in the speakers, or it's not representative of those audiences. That disconnect says you're doing this for you to look good, but you're not doing it to actually help me. And it's when you have, so the key is when we talk about things like transparent, authentic. Authentic means that what you're saying or what you're showing matches what you're doing. And especially with the data that's telling us that as demographics change, as Gen Z and Gen Alpha start coming into the workplace, Gen Z is already there. They value diversity and they value social advocacy more than any other generation. When they see those disconnects, they are choosing to go elsewhere. They're doing it with universities. They're doing it with provinces. I'm working with a nursing organization right now because we have a healthcare crisis, and people are. Toronto is a destination. Canada is a destination, right? But mostly Canada, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Why? Because if you're bringing foreign nurses in that are absolutely needed to take care of our growing senior population, those nurses need to feel safe. So they're choosing the countries and the provinces and the states where they feel they have community and they feel like they feel like they can belong. And it's all connected, right? Like, I think that's the thing, that you need to be authentic. And if you're not, you can be aspirational. You can say, this is what we want to happen, but what are the steps you're taking to get there? And that's part of your story. We're not there yet, but here's what we're doing to help us get there. So it's really thinking about what that looks like and what's in it for the audience that you're representing in those ads. And if it's not connected, then it actually creates distrust instead of trust. It's the opposite of what you intend.
True. That's so true. Thanks for that. And not say traditionally, but I feel inspired to go into rapid fire questions with you. So
Oh
yeah.
no, okay.
Well, I did promise we will have a curveball, but I hope this isn't because it has food in it. So I know.
Okay, good. I'm good
All
with
right,
food.
make you feel at ease. Okay. All right. So here we go. What's your go-to comfort food?
Go-to comfort food is a samosa.
Ooh.
I love a
Okay.
samosa. A good samosa.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We'll look out for some of those on your Instagram. That's if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh, historical figure. You know what? It's just a figure in general. I love Oprah. I'm
Hmm.
such a fan of Oprah. I guess she's historical. She will be historical. She has made
She's
such a difference. She's created. She's opened so many doors that I'm a big fan of her.
I think she's labeled as a living legend, isn't it? Maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, you're right. Beach or mountain?
Beach, definitely.
Okay. All right.
With a
Sounds fair
good
enough.
book. With a good book, Suji.
Whoa, don't preempt me. Because the next question is favorite book that impacted your life?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question. A book that I've read so many books, and I'm trying to figure out which one would I say would had impacted my life. You know, I really, really like Secret Daughter by I think it's Shilpa Gaudi.
Yeah.
Gouda?
Gaudi. Yeah. Yeah.
Shilpa,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
sh- I think it was because it was one of the first books where even though I didn't grow up in India, there were so
Yeah.
many things I could relate with in the book in terms of concepts, because you were used to reading reading Bronte and Wuthering Heights and
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice, and everything
Yeah.
was in these colonial and white spaces.
Yes.
And it was really interesting and I think it was Oprah's book club that highlighted Secret Daughter. And I was
I
like,
think that
I'm
was
going to
her
read that.
first book. I think that was her first book.
Yes, Secret Daughter was her
Yeah.
first book, and I've actually read every one of her books, and she just launched released a new one, so that'll be on my reading list soon too. But I think it was all of a sudden when you see people like you for so long we haven't. That was really important.
She writes really. She's one of those who has garnered some acclaim from writing immigration stories, and they are quite meaningful as well. Her second one, The Golden Sun. Her second book, The Golden Sun, that was also very good.
Yes. What I really liked about her books was the premise of this North American person. It was the North American story and the Indian story, and that combination, and and so many of her books are kind of that tension between the different generations, and I could relate to that. Right. So I really liked the exposure to the various cultures, the nuances. What does it mean to be in the country, and what the historical and cultural, what you learn in the country. But then when you come to a new country, what of that do you keep and what do you take away? Like so many of her, it's always, there's so many things that are relatable in the book from that perspective.
True. And of course, she writes a good love story too.
Oh, of course.
She's probably the Indian Nicholas Spark.
There you go.
Last question. What's a skill you've always wanted to learn but haven't had the chance to? Yes.
A skill that I'd always wanted to learn. Oh my goodness. I want to, you know what? I'd love to learn. I wish I spoke a different language. I lost my language when I came to Canada in the 70s. It wasn't cool to be, speaking other languages. You were very conscious of your accent and all of that stuff. So you spent so much time assimilating. And now that I'm older, I admire those parents who kept the language. So I understand some Hindi. I understand Marathi, which is a dialect that's spoken in the Maharashtra region of India. I would love to learn my language.
Awesome. And on that note, I'd like to thank you, Priya Bates, for this very enlightening session, this conversation. I've learned a ton, and I want to thank you for your generosity with your time, with your wisdom, with your experience. I can't thank you enough, and I hope next time I call on you, you will grant that honor.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Priya.